Everybody wants their civil rights. I believe that before you get any rights, first, you gotta be civil. The whole philosophy of government is how to get you to pay for what I want. Since it costs more to put people in prison than it does to send them to Harvard University, do you think maybe we're doing something wrong here? I created NiteBites to present all sides of the issues and empower you, the viewer, to make your own decisions. Howdy, folks! Welcome to NiteBites. I'm your host, Garen, and this is my special guest today, Peggy Costello, who is an historian. She's been teaching history to the students of California for longer than I care to remember. And
or me.
She is, I asked her to join me today because she thinks I have a warped sense of history. Because I was today watching the Sunday shows and listening to the outbursts of Senator Rick Santorum, who I think is a fucking Nazi. You don't like that, do you?
No, that term has definite historic connotations to me, and I think that you can't use it that way.
Yeah, he's a Nazi. He is somebody who is telling a lie. He's telling a monstrous lie. And he's basically taking people who are in the midst of this horrible economy, and he's promising them that he knows the way to restore prosperity, just like a gentleman named Hitler did in the last century. And he's saying, but I got all these social policies, but don't pay any attention to my Neanderthal social policies, and don't pay any attention to the fact that there is a segment of our society, a large measurable segment of our society, who I hate and would love to send off to concentration camps and gas chambers because they are not worthy of occupying the earth with the rest of us. And by the way, he also hates women.
Ouch. Well, now, wait a minute. I'm getting from you, Clark, that you think a Nazi is someone who lies. Could you give me a little more about what a Nazi is from your point of view?
He's somebody who preaches, uses the economy, uses your economic well-being to make you forget the fact that he is a hate monger. Now, this man has said that women should not be able to have contraception, not be able to have birth control pills, because according to him, birth control pills allow an awful lot of immoral sexual conduct to go on. They're a license for it, according to him. And this man got on the floor of the House of Representatives, where John Quincy Adams spent years battling slavery, even though he wasn't a founding father like Sarah Palin said. He spent his life on the House floor arguing against slavery, as did many other heroic representatives, politicians, and he went on that floor to denounce the opinion of the United States Supreme Court in the case of sodomy in Texas. Excuse me, folks. Now, this case in Texas involved two people of the same sex who were engaged in private sexual activity in their own bedroom. And the police came barging in on a phony search warrant, raided them, and then criminally charged them, wanted to put them in jail for engaging in sodomy. And it got to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. They have a right of privacy. And Rick Santorum, a lawyer, a man who went to school and trained in the law, trained in understanding and interpreting the law, had the nerve to get on the floor of the House of Representatives and say that the Supreme Court was wrong. There is no right of privacy in your own bedroom. He had the nerve to do that. And this man now wants to be president.
Okay, boy, you sure have a whole watch list for him, don't you?
Well, I mean, all you got to do is listen to him. When he's not talking about the economy, he's talking about creating war on various segments of our society, women and gay people.
And that's the basis for
And basically, anybody who's not a card-carrying, observant Catholic, he wants to wage war against.
Aha, okay, well, start with his attitude towards women. I certainly don't like the man on the basis of that, but I wouldn't say it's on a par with the Lebensborn movement with the Nazis, where they were using impressionable young women to breed more of their master race.
Well, why not? Why isn't this man a Nazi?
Well, Nazi has a definite historical context, Clark,
Yeah.
and you are dealing with a war where almost 50 million people died, 11 million of them in the camps.
Well, who knows how many Rick's going to kill when he gets a chance?
He doesn't have the opportunity to do that with the nature of our government. But let's take a look specifically at the points you've made, the bullet points with Santorum.
Yeah.
Take a look at his attitude towards women and birth control.
Okay. He says that under the same premise he used to be able to put gays in jail for engaging in sexual behavior in the privacy of their own bedroom, he says that under the federal Constitution, states have the right to prohibit you broads from being able to take birth control pills. The state has the right to prohibit their sale, just like they can prohibit marijuana or methamphetamine or cocaine or anything else. They can prohibit women from being able to buy birth control pills.
Well, that's bad, but you can't call him a Nazi over that. What you need to do is call him a devout to the extreme Catholic who wants to rule the government according to the precepts of his religion.
Well, how's that different than a Nazi? The Nazi wants to make you do everything their way.
Call him a run-of-the-mill fascist, but a Nazi, there's more to it than that. We all know, too.
Well, wait a minute. What's the difference between a Nazi and a fascist?
Well, fascist is a more generalized term that applied to Spain and Italy and Germany and Japan.
Well, I don't care about their
War II.
nationalities. What are their characteristics?
National Socialism.
You want to talk English?
That's the term for it, National Socialism. Not international socialism like the communists, but National Socialism to the benefit of the nation.
Well, what does that have to do with taking everybody's rights away?
Well, it's a different type of government. We have a balance, a check and balance system in our government. And I think it put the lid on Santorum, frankly, like it's done to Obama and the promises he likes to make.
Well, he's a whole nother issue of disappointment and broken promises. But
Do you ever get anything else from politicians?
yeah, but with Obama, I mean, the reason I'm so angry about these people following Santorum is I hate Obama. He's a lying sack of shit. His health care reform, Obamacare, is the worst idea we've ever had. And he does need to leave office. And I really want to vote for a Republican. I want to put in somebody that's going to repeal Obamacare. I want somebody who's going to stop spending $1.5 trillion. But there's only so much I'm willing to pay for that. And I'm not willing to go back to the 18th century. I'm not willing to vote for somebody who says women can't take birth control pills. I am not willing more important, I am not willing to vote for somebody, no matter how much it's going to help me economically. I cannot vote for somebody who wants to wage war on such a large segment of our population, who really wants to wage war on people who are gay. Now, I'm not gay. I have never been gay. I never expect to be gay. And I really don't have much to do with the gay lifestyle. So, frankly, if he wants to wage war on homosexuals, this is not going to cause a major interference with my life. But this is what the problem is. There was something they said during Nazi Germany. First they came to take the Jews away, and I wasn't Jewish, so I didn't say anything. Then they came to take the Catholics away, and I wasn't Catholic, so I didn't say anything. Then they came and took all the handicapped people away, and I wasn't handicapped, and I didn't say anything. And then they came to take me away, and there wasn't anybody left to say anything. And that's what's frightening about Santorum, because if he's ready to wage war on homosexuals today, he's willing to wage war on you and me and everybody else who does not follow his ultra-strict form of Catholicism tomorrow. This is a man who actually had the balls to get on the air with Bill O'Reilly, who is himself a physically imposing person. I think he's about 6'4" or 6'6", and the man has a temper. And he sat and told him how he was on the air recently, told him he's a bad Catholic because he supports a woman's right to have birth control pills. So this is a man who would if he could, would establish this as a theocracy, a state that follows the Catholic religion. And he's just frightening. Now, I got no use for Newt Gingrich. He's a politician. He's for sale. He's going to do whatever he has to say. And everybody says, and Mitt's probably a less severe case of the same thing. Everybody loves Santorum because they say, well, he has integrity. He stands for something. He's idealistic. He has his values. Yeah, he has values. The problem is he's a true believer. He's an ideologue. He believes that only his way is right. And what we're going to get is a dictator who's working on what he believes God told him to do.
Do you think he's mainstream enough for Americans to go for that?
No, I frankly believe if the Republicans are stupid enough to nominate this man, Obama isn't even going to have to bother campaigning.
Look at all the hassle they gave Kennedy, the first Catholic to run as president. Well, not run, that was in the 1920s with Smith, but the first one to get elected. And the public constantly wanted reassurances that he wasn't going to govern the nation in accordance with his Catholic faith.
But you and I are old enough to remember that campaign. And President Kennedy ran away from the church, as did John Kerry. He said, yes, I'm a Catholic, and yes, I go to Mass. And what we didn't know is as soon as he got out of Mass, he went and found a broad to go service him, not his wife. And then the next week, he went to go and get forgiveness for it, or whatever the hell they do.
That's all right. Still got time in purgatory for it.
But the point of it is, he was not campaigning as a Catholic who wanted to be president. He was campaigning as a politician who wanted to be president, who just happened to be a Catholic. Rick Santorum wants to be a Catholic president. Big difference. And it's frightening. It just doesn't work. And I am confident that he won't get elected. That's the good news. The bad news is that if they nominate him, Obama will. But the real problem is all these crazy Republicans who were following him. All these people who go vote for him and with wild gazes in their eyes say, this is what I want. I want somebody with values. I want somebody who's conservative.
Catholicism isn't mainstream enough to attract that many American supporters.
Well, it doesn't. This is a Republican primary. These are not mainstream people. These are the ultra-conservative Republicans in Michigan and Colorado.
Born-agains? Voting for a Catholic?
Yeah, they are, and I just don't understand it. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back, so please stay with us. Welcome back to NiteBites. I'm your host, Clark Garen. My guest, Peggy Costello, who is correcting me on history and most of my warped views. But what we were talking about before we left was these people who follow Rick Santorum. Now, I remember in '08, I voted for Obama. And I did it with pride. And I was just so sick and tired of Bush and the Iraq War and all those lies that I wanted the Democrats to come in. And then we got bitch Pelosi. And Obama basically camped out in the White House and rode around on Air Force One and left the running of the government to bitch Pelosi and Harry Reid, who in an earlier life was a boxer and took too many shots, just like Muhammad Ali. And they ran roughshod. People were unemployed, the economy was falling apart, and all they wanted to do was do health care. So he spent all his capital on health care reform. And he didn't get any health care reform. All he did was pass the largest tax increase in the history of the country. Starting in 2014, every time you put a deposit in the bank, 1% goes to a federal tax on that deposit. You sell a home, 3% goes to the federal government, a sales tax on real estate. These are just some of the taxes we have to pay for this wonderful Obamacare.
So what do you think is a big issue? Is it the economy, or is it these ethics and values?
Well, it all
that you're not sure
depends.
of?
If you're one of the 8.5% plus another few million people who don't have a job, it's the economy. If you're one of these multimillionaires, it's the tax rates. But Obama was such, and the Democrats were such a disappointment. So I wanted something to check Obamacare. And the Republicans were slick. They came up with the Tea Party, who they said were people who were interested in the economy, interested in stopping the spending. And yeah, that's me. I want to stop the spending. And then they had some really weird candidates. They had Sharon Engel in Nevada, who basically was looking, if she didn't get elected, she wanted to resort to her Second Amendment remedies. In other words, start shooting people. And then you had this broad out of Delaware, I can't remember her name, the one who was a witch. I've mercifully forgotten her name. But for these two crazy candidates the Tea Party put in, the Republicans would have controlled the Senate.
What do you think the people want now? There was so much hope when Obama first took office, and we can see the disappointment.
And there was
Where'd it
so
come from
much
now?
hope when these Republicans came in. We were hoping they were going to do something about spending. But the Republicans haven't really been that interested in spending issues. They've been interested in social issues. And that's pretty much what happens every time they have a bill going through. They stop it on social issues, not fiscal issues. And it's the same with the Democrats. It's on their social issues, different social issues, and their spending issue. The Democrats want a welfare state.
To what extent do
And,
we have one at this point?
well, let me give you an example. We've had a problem way back a few years ago of something called internet gambling, where people would charge credit cards so they could do internet gambling, and they couldn't pay the credit cards. So this is something that is the easiest thing in the world to cure. All you gotta do is pass a law that says a credit card company cannot collect any bill that's based on gambling. So if you're able to prove that you made a charge for the purpose of gambling, the credit card company can't collect it. That's a defense. Do that, all of a sudden there's no more internet gaming problem because they can't play. Would they do that? Oh no, they pass a law and they create commissions to regulate this internet gambling. And they have federal criminal people trying to go to other countries to arrest these people and spend our taxpayer money doing this. When all they had to do was eliminate the ability to collect it. But they wouldn't bother doing that. They want to have a whole big bureaucracy. And it's the same thing kind of on this, you see this with this Consumer Protection Agency that Obama just got through to protect people from all these supposed abuses, and have a whole bunch of employees in all departments to collect consumer. Real simple, pass a law that gives them a defense, give them the ability to get attorney fees, and you won't have a problem. The conduct will stop. But all the Democrats can think of is government programs. And that's a big problem with Obama and his tax increases. He wants a millionaire's tax. He wants taxes on the rich.
Well, are people paying their fair share?
Well, they probably aren't. But if he would take those taxes he wants to do and earmark them to retire the federal debt, I would be all for it. But that isn't what he wants to do. He wants to tax the rich and then go hire a bunch of people. He wants to go hire teachers, which are actually a local expenditure, not a federal expenditure. He wants to hire cops, which are a local expenditure, not a federal expenditure. He wants to create all these money to create more employment. And the problem with that is it doesn't solve the problem.
Pump priming was tried before, and the biggest turn down in the economy the nation ever experienced.
Well, and all it did was delay it, because the problem is the local governments can't pay for these people. That's why they're letting them go in the first place. And all you're doing is delaying this adjustment. And, you know, that's all they're doing. Plus, we're getting this huge debt, which is someday going to come due. You're seeing what's happening in Europe. That's going to be what's going to happen here. 40% of our budget goes for Medicare and Social Security. And the Republicans actually come up with some ideas to do something. Every time the Republicans say, oh, well, let's means test Social Security, you know who's against that? Obama and the Democrats. Now, if they want to do a millionaire's tax, why not take Social Security away from me? Oh, no, we don't want to do that.
Why not charge them their full value that they make for Social Security? In other words, isn't it down at 90,000 or whatever that they pay Social Security on?
Well, that's another thing. That's another problem with both Social Security and Medicare. When they started Social Security back in FDR's days in the 30s, you had 16 people working for every single person who got a benefit check.
So we baby boomers are getting old now.
Well, now you got 2 people working for everyone who got it. The math doesn't work. Pretty soon you're going to have 2 people getting it for everyone who's working. And the math doesn't work because you have too small a tax base. Now, if you want to do something realistic, instead of limiting Social Security to earned income, tax all income for Social Security. then you'll expand the tax base. As long as Social Security's dependent only on the first $90,000 or $110,000 or whatever of your earned income, it's never going to make any sense.
So therefore you want to put it on an income tax, federal income tax?
Yeah, I want to basically broaden the tax base to let all income be taxed to pay for the Social Security benefits. But at the same time, let's means test Social Security. There is no reason, you know, they keep on talking about the Buffett world. Poor Warren Buffett pays a lower tax rate than his secretary. Okay. I don't have a problem with that. The problem I have, at the same point in time, he's getting Social Security. Why the hell should he be paid Social Security? He needs it like a moose needs a hat rack.
I want to clarify then. Are you saying that for Social Security purposes, the rich should be taxed on the same percentage basis as everyone else, but they shouldn't get the Social Security when they retire? Is that what you're telling me?
Exactly. Because Social Security is not a retirement act. Everybody keeps thinking on it like a pension. It's not a pension. It is a government program. It is a government benefit. They're taking our tax money, and by definition, if you're going to take our tax money, it should be distributed to people who need it. People keep on saying it's a pension plan.
Well, they pay into it every month. That's probably where they get that
Yeah,
feeling.
but it's a tax.
Okay.
It's called Social Security tax. It's not called a Social Security pension. It's called a tax. And the real problem with Social Security is not, believe it or not, the people who are retired, including the Warren Buffetts of the world. The problem with Social Security are all the other people and the elderly who get it. People who are injured in their 20s and their 30s and get Social Security benefits for 60 years. And kids who, I'm talking about young children, who basically have some kind of disability, they can't read or whatever it is, and then they get Social Security for life. You've just taken this system and, it's like, these marathon swimmers who like to swim from Long Beach to Catalina or whatever. So they go and try and swim, and then sometimes they try and do a handicap, so they put a rowboat behind them. Well, think of Social Security. It's like we're a swimmer, and we want them to tow the Queen Mary behind them. And if you'll recall, it's dry docked. It won't float. So it's just a plan, excuse me, folks. It's a plan that doesn't really make sense, but nobody is really doing anything about it.
Well, in Roosevelt's time, I don't think we were expected to live as long as we are now, and that's part of the balance.
Well, people didn't live that long. Yeah. And
you had more Americans being created, getting back to your birth control issue, to pay into it.
Well, like I say, but then we killed a lot of them off during World War II, too. But, the big thing is that, back to where we were talking, which is this guy Santorum and the Republicans. In 2010, we wanted them to put a brake on Obama. We wanted them to give fiscal responsibility. And I wasn't that unhappy when they were threatening to shut down the government. Now, they said they had to pay for things. They wanted to cut programs to pay for things. And the Democrats and Obama weren't going along with that. One of the big arguments now over the unemployment benefits is they want federal workers to pay more of their contributions for their pension. What a horrible thought. A federal worker actually pays the cost of his pension. Why is that? Well, because the Democrats are beholden to these unions. And so I want to see a Republican. I want to be able to vote for a Republican. I want them to nominate somebody I can vote for. I cannot vote for a demagogue. And that's Rick Santorum.
Well, I don't know. The American public doesn't seem to be happy with anybody right now. You're desperately looking for a Republican. A lot of us wish we had a choice with Democrats, but we don't. What is it the public really wants?
What nobody's given them. What we have is government of the extremes. We get to vote for an ultra-conservative, or we get to vote for an ultra-liberal. We don't get to vote for a moderate, which is why people are so angry. We don't get to vote for somebody who's actually interested in solving our problems.
That isn't just an issue with the presidency, it's an issue with the legislative
Congress,
branch.
the state, everywhere. And it started with a gentleman who you'll remember from California, Big Daddy Jess Unruh. And it was solved by Arnold Schwarzenegger. And we'll talk about that right after this break. Please stay. Howdy, folks. Welcome back to NiteBites. I'm your host, Clark Garen. My historical guest, Peggy Costello. I guess she's not a historical.
Yeah, I'm thinking here I'm going to be a fossil.
Yeah. Yeah, before we left for our break, I mentioned the start of these factions, and we used to have the most powerful person in California government was a gentleman named Big Daddy Jess Unruh. And Jess was a master politician, and he suddenly started noticing that moderate Republicans were able to defeat liberal Democrats. So he started getting the districts drawn in California. So you had an ultra-liberal versus an ultra-conservative.
Gerrymandering.
Gerrymandering, but on the basis of, instead of how it had been before, so that you had Democrats and Republicans, you had ultra-liberal and ultra-conservative. And people saw the success of this, and it just scattered out all over the country. And but all this fractionalization that we have started in California with Big Daddy Jess Unruh. And our last Republican governor actually succeeded in doing something about it. Arnold Schwarzenegger, who left office kind of frustrated and not all that popular, but in my opinion will go down in history as one of the greatest governors in the history of this state.
Why?
Because he got two things, election reforms put through. One is completely open primaries. We tried something. California used to have something called cross-filing, where Democrats, if they didn't want to vote in the Democratic primary, could vote in the Republican primary, and Republicans, they didn't care about the Republican, could vote in the Democratic primary, and then we got away with it, so did away with it. Then we brought it back. And the United States Supreme Court threw it out, said it violated freedom of association. So Arnold came in and says, well, I know what we'll do with that. We're going to have an open primary. We're not going to have a Democratic primary. We're not going to have a Republican primary. We're going to have a primary, and the top two vote getters will run against each other. They can be a Democrat and a Republican, or they can be two Republicans, or they can be two Democrats. And say, if we'd have had that system in place when Gray Davis was elected governor, Gray Davis never would have been elected governor. Because in the Republican primary, we had a very popular Republican politician, Richard Riordan, who wanted to be governor, former mayor of Los Angeles, but he was too liberal for those Neanderthal Republicans. So they instead, they nominated some guy who was, I forget his name, but he was indicted, and he just lost by a landslide, and that's how Gray Davis got in. And of course, he didn't last too long. We're going to have an open primary. And the second thing he did, he said the districts are going to be drawn by a commission that is not controlled by politicians, with the goal of balancing each district to make the districts competitive. And so it is really breaking the stranglehold that
In California.
That the ultra-liberal and the ultra-conservatives have had. And it will eventually bring about some real reform here in California, which maybe will go out across the country.
That's what I was wondering. What's the impact on the federal government maybe one of these days?
Well, the first impact is going to be the California congressional districts are going to be drawn. So we're probably going to get a few more Democrats from California. Bitch Pelosi thinks because of redistricting, she's going to be able to take back the House. This is probably not going to happen. Well, that's not really true. There is one way the Democrats could take back the House, and that's if the Republicans are stupid enough to nominate Rick Santorum as their standard bearer. But, you know, one of the things that's been going on, people are saying now that, well, it may be something called a brokered convention, the Republican convention. All that means is when delegates go to the convention, they're pledged to vote for their candidate on the first ballot only. Then they can vote for whoever they want to. And people are thinking, well, maybe they're going to find some miracle candidate if they go to the convention and it's deadlocked and nobody has enough votes to be nominated. But the problem is these delegates are these same idiots who support Rick Santorum and people like Sharon Ingle. And I mean, these delegates who are going are these nutcases who are only going to nominate a conservative, an ultra-conservative, who cannot win. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if they deadlock if they don't nominate Sarah Palin.
She's out of it. What do you think is going to be the issue in the fact that frequently Americans like to vote confrontational government? One party in the presidency, another party in the Congress.
Well, I think this is one of the things people have overlooked. I think we're going to have gridlock at confrontational government no matter who gets the White House, because it takes 60 votes to do business in the Senate. And after this election, unless they nominate Rick Santorum, nobody's going to have 60 votes in the Senate.
You're talking about the filibuster.
Yeah. So it is, if they nominate Rick Santorum or somebody worse than him, all bets are off. But if they come through and they nominate Romney, even if he doesn't get elected, we're still going to have gridlock. And I do not think that Bitch Pelosi is going to be able to take over the House, because these idealistic Republicans are largely doing what the people in their district want them to do.
The rate's very low in terms of how Americans think about their current government. They're disgusted with Congress and the president.
But, well, they're frustrated because nobody's helping them. But a lot of them don't want to see the money spent. The Republicans who got elected, the Tea Party people who got elected promising financial austerity, are still going to be able to get reelected in their districts. You don't see the home district clamoring for these people to open their checkbook and spend money. That's only over in, the San Francisco district, where Bitch Pelosi's got a safe seat.
Well, you do not like that woman.
No, I don't. She's a big part of this problem. These are just ultra liberals, but I mean, she's like a rock, a clock that doesn't run, that it's still right twice a day. I mean, her comment on, even I had to admire her. She talks about this picture of the panel of 6 men testifying before the Committee on Women's Reproductive Rights and Women's Health, and she says, 6 men talking about women's health, no woman. Duh!
Yeah.
Yeah, but
But Americans are interested in a government that functions, and when you talk about gridlock, no one feels it's functioning.
But it is functioning, because part of what America needs is change that is very slow. That's why we stay here. We can't live with a government that has change that is very fast, because it takes a while. That was one of the things. It's too bad when Obama was busy studying Lincoln, he didn't pay a little bit more attention to what he studied, because Abraham Lincoln was a master of timing. Everybody thought that he was just this doddering fool who couldn't come to a decision. But what he was is he just would lead people, and he was a master of timing. He waited until the moment was right. He waited until he really had the support. And then he acted. The most classic example being the Emancipation Proclamation. He always wanted to sign it, but he waited to sign it until everybody else was at him to do it and mad at him why he hadn't done it before.
Well, he only freed the slaves he had no control over anyway, the ones in the South. He didn't free the ones in the border states.
And your point is?
Another consummate politician.
Yeah, okay. But Obama would have been good to have done that. To have recognized that he needs to wait for people to catch up to him. He still hasn't learned that. And the real problem with Obama is he's still a professor. He's not a politician. He doesn't like people. He doesn't get along with people. And he isn't interested in people. He's interested in policy, and to a limited extent about what it does to people. But he just doesn't have the ability to be warm and friendly with strangers in a way that Bill Clinton did. Bill Clinton was just a master at it.
So was Ronald Reagan.
Yes, so was Ronald Reagan. And so was John Kennedy. But Obama doesn't know how to use his office to get the consensus and get people to do what he wants them to do. Actually, the person he really needs to take some lessons from and study is not Lincoln, but Lyndon Baines Johnson. Because Johnson was a master at manipulating the Congress to get what he wanted.
But that's because he was in it for so long. He could call in chits.
No, that was only a part of it. Part of it was he just had immense personal charm on a one-to-one basis. He loved politics. He loved people. And he didn't project on television, but he really projected on a one-to-one basis. He would call people in, and he could just reason with them and talk to them. He knew how to use his office, and that would be a good person for Obama to study.
They say right now that the disrespect paid to the executive, the chief executive, is much less than it's been in history in terms of how the public is relating to him.
Well, that's because they don't relate to him. And because he looks down on people. He talks down to people, something Johnson knew better not to do. You know, Johnson, he would have been, if he hadn't got mired in Vietnam, he would have been one of the greatest presidents we ever had. Even with Vietnam, some of his accomplishments are just daunting in terms of what he did in the relatively short time he was in office. But one of the things he doesn't really get credit for is that he was a Southerner who was early exposed to racial prejudice and felt it was wrong and was determined to do something to change it.
That's an important point to make, I think, because Kennedy wasn't strong enough in his office, given the margin by which he became president. It was Johnson who was able to carry out many of the hopes and dreams that Kennedy had.
Kennedy had some of the same problems that Obama had, and we're going to talk about those when we come back, so please stay with us. We'll be right back. Howdy, folks. Welcome back to NiteBites. I'm your host, Clark Garen. My friend Peggy Costello, our historian. And before we left, we were talking about Obama and John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Baines Johnson. And Kennedy was a Harvard elite, just as Obama is. Kennedy and Obama are both brilliant people. Kennedy was a much better communicator. Kennedy didn't take himself seriously. He could laugh at himself, and he had a sense of humor that Obama doesn't have. But neither one of them really understand people in a way that Johnson did. Now, Johnson started out as a school teacher in a very small town in Texas, and he dealt firsthand with the prejudices against black people and poor people, and he was determined to do something about it in a way that the Kennedy brothers really were not. To the Kennedys, Kennedy was primarily concerned with the Cold War and Russia, and Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement were more of a political issue that was getting in the way of the international problems. And most of our audience doesn't remember, but in that age, the big product of the moment was an underground bomb shelter that everybody was buying to bury in their backyard for when a nuclear bomb dropped. It really was a scary time. And Johnson came in, and he had a commitment to civil rights that Kennedy didn't.
Well, Kennedy did get the black vote to put him in office. He simply didn't have the support for the civil rights movement.
Well, Johnson didn't have the support either. He went and got it. When he signed the Voting Rights Act, he made a statement. He said, this is going to lose the South to the Republican Party for the next 50 years, which is exactly what happened. But he was willing to pay that political price for it because it was just something that was right to do. It was a very courageous thing for him to do, and it was something that Johnson, who is regarded as the ultimate politician, it's something that he did that was a total unpolitically wise act to do. There weren't votes in it, but he used the office to do something that he thought was right. And an awful lot of the social Medicare was passed under Johnson. Mm-hmm. Welfare was, as we know it, was passed under Johnson.
You also had HUD developed under Johnson.
You know, if you ever go to the LBJ library in Austin, which I hardly recommend people do, you can see a wall just listing all the different acts of legislation this man was responsible for, and it's breathtaking. The impact he had, because you got to remember, he was only president for 5 years. He served one 4-year term plus 1 year of the unexpired term of President Kennedy.
And I always say that the battleground for civil rights was lost in the fields of Vietnam during that unpopular war. Do you think that Obama has some of the same problems in terms of his goals and ambitions and dreams versus the foreign wars that have hurt the economy?
No, because Obama really didn't make the foreign wars. He got us out of Iraq. He ran on Afghanistan, but I think he's rapidly figuring out that this is not really a good project either. Obama has, in my opinion, done an absolutely stellar job with foreign affairs. I laugh when I hear the Republicans trying to criticize his foreign policy, because he got a very bad deck of cards dealt to him by the prior administration's mistakes, and he has really done amazing things with it. And one of the interesting things about that is, see, when he does foreign policy, he in large part doesn't have to deal with the Congress.
Yeah.
He basically is pretty much responsible for it on his own. And of course, he always also has Hurricane Hillary doing it for him. He got Liam Panetta. He's got some really good people and left him alone to do the job. And he is courageous. Some of the moves he's made have been very courageous. I mean, I really, have to admire him for some of that and compliment him for it. But our primary problem isn't foreign policy, it's domestic policy. And one of the things that quite frankly scares me about all of the Republicans is they're all running on the idea of more involvement in the Middle East, which is only going to be a disaster for us. But the good thing is they're all also running on drill baby drill. And that is the ultimate solution to all of our Middle East problems. Drill baby drill. Get our natural gas. One of the things I was just looking at today was the problems, the paperwork involved in converting vehicles to run on natural gas. And the Environmental Protection Agency of the federal government has made it cost prohibitive for individuals to do that. Now, we have more natural gas than we're ever going to use. Why the government doesn't make it easy to convert cars to run on compressed natural gas, I'll never know. You can go back to buying gas for a little over $1 a gallon.
My, that would be nice.
It's just crazy, but that isn't something Obama does. Maybe Republicans will do that, because as you know, the Republicans are not too fond of the Environmental Protection Agency. But unfortunately, instead of running on the issues that would get them elected, the Republicans are voting for people with all of this baggage. And the one thing I can't forget about Rick Santorum, he lost his Senate seat in Pennsylvania by 16%. You know why?
Tell me.
You remember Terry Schiavo?
Oh, yes. Tragic.
Terry Schiavo was that lady in Florida who was brain dead and had been a vegetable for years, who her husband wanted to stop life support on. And the politicians got into it. Now, there's one fact about that case that's not well known. and that is they put out the charge that the husband, who was trying to cut off her life support, was doing it for money because of her insurance benefits and so on. Those had been spent long ago. The religious right raised money and offered him $750,000 to leave her alone, to let them use her as a poster child to keep her alive. He turned the money down. He said, I have a duty to my wife to let her die. She didn't want to do this. But anyhow, Rick Santorum was holding a prayer session on the Senate floor, trying to put through legislation to keep poor Terry Schiavo alive, to make that little girl in Florida subject to a federal law that would stop the husband from letting her die. And that's why he lost his Senate seat.
I'm glad.
By 16 points.
Yes.
And, you know, what I've been able to figure out is why Mitt Romney is not advertising that, doing that on the ads against Rick Santorum. But apparently the problem is they're not running them because these idiots who want to vote for him think this is a good thing.
Well, Mitt Romney has been very careful not to get into those kind of value issues. Does he feel that his Mormonism is something that will be used against him?
Actually, that's very interesting, because one of the things I heard is that in an awful lot of his life, an awful lot of the good human helping people things he's done have been through his position in the Mormon Church. Mm-hmm. And that's why he doesn't talk about it, because he's afraid that that will be used against him. So he's almost fighting this with one hand tied behind his back, because he did good things as a member of the Mormon Church, but he can't talk about that because it'll emphasize his religion.
Whereas Santorum freely emphasizes his.
Yeah, well, of course, one of the things that's interesting, Romney, if I'm not mistaken, gave pretty close to 10% of his pretty massive income to charity.
Yes, tithing.
Do you know what percentage of his almost $2 million income Rick Santorum gave to charity?
Tell me.
You don't know, do you?
No.
Around 1%.
Catholics don't regularly tithe. Mormons do. You're talking about putting your money where your mouth is, huh?
Well, what I'm saying is, we're talking about the person who has values. And granted, Mitt Romney makes many, many times what Rick Santorum does. But Rick Santorum's still making over $1 million a year. And he's making almost $2 million a year. And if he contributed 1%, $2,200,000, that means he gave a lousy $20,000 to charity out of his $2 million. And
you saying he's talk, not action?
I'm saying that, put your money where your mouth is, and his money isn't there. So you want to talk about somebody who has values. Seems to me the guy who gives 10% to charity probably has more values than the guy who gives 1%.
And why do you feel it's a disadvantage for him to try to inform the American population about the Mormon Church?
Well, because there are so many people out there who are the Republican base who believe that Mormons aren't Christians.
They felt Catholics were the devil at one point.
Well, Rick Santorum may yet prove that's true, but I just think he's treading a very difficult line with what Romney is with his religion, and I think it's really unfortunate. It does not reflect good on the United States, and it especially doesn't reflect good on the Republican Party that these people who are supposedly values voters only seem to be interested, the only value they're interested in is who controls a woman's reproductive system. And because for as far as I can see, that's the only value that they're interested in.
Do you think the average American really wants a separation between church and state? Or are you saying that they
The
really
average
want
American or the average conservative Republican?
Well, I'm talking about the final election on this. I'm talking about the average American when he goes into the poll to vote.
Oh, the average American wants a separation of church and state. Because here's what the problem is. The minute we start establishing one national religion, it's going to change with who's ever in charge. If we put Rick Santorum in and he makes this a Catholic nation, well, then who's going to come next? We could elect a devil worshiper and they'll make it a devil nation. Who the hell knows? We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Please stay with us. Howdy, folks. Welcome back to NiteBites. I'm your host, Clark Garen. My cohort in crime here, Peggy Costello, the historian. So anyway, let's get back to where we started and why it is that you get so upset when I call Rick Santorum a Nazi.
Okay. It's an inappropriate term.
What term would you describe for somebody who wants to make this country a theocracy and run the place according to his sense of what is right and wrong?
Well, there are a lot of countries that are run as theocracies, but this country has a check and balance system amongst the three branches of government that I have a lot of faith in. And therefore, you want to talk about dictatorship. You don't throw the term Nazi and dictatorship as being equal. He is dictatorial, but he's not a Nazi.
And what's the difference between a dictator and a Nazi?
Well, you have loads of types of dictatorships.
Okay.
But when we think of Nazi Germany, we are thinking of programs of
exterminating people?
yes,
And you don't think if Rick Santorum could round up all the homosexuals and put them in train carts and cart them to a camp and kill them, you don't think he'd do it?
No, I don't think he'd do it. Why do you think he would? How do you think he could get away with it in this country?
We're a different thing. You're saying the government won't let him. I'm saying if he could, he would.
I understand the difference.
Do you think he would?
No.
Why don't you think he would?
I don't think his animosity is that extensive. I think
Well,
he
now,
is
wait
a
a minute.
conservative Catholic who lives by his faith, and these are positions that average Americans really don't wish to embrace.
Okay, well, but what does his faith say about homosexuals?
That they're sinners, and
Okay,
that they will probably burn in hell,
okay.
but
And that
God's going to get them in the next world.
But don't you think Santorum thinks he has an obligation to punish them here too?
How?
Well,
really think he's
for starters, he thinks they ought to be all put in jail for committing sodomy. He got up on the House floor and said that.
Okay, but that doesn't mean he's going to exterminate them, like Hitler did with gays.
Well, he could make sodomy a capital offense.
Now, you know he couldn't have that kind of power to do that, and there's nothing he said that would mean that he would. It's just a loaded term to use for an American in the modern world.
Okay. So you think I'm over-dramatizing how dangerous he is?
Absolutely. He doesn't have that kind of clout, and he doesn't have those particular inclinations to murder. He's held responsible for his actions and thoughts as well
Okay.
in Catholicism.
Okay, well, so what do you think about us as a country having a number of people who support somebody who preaches hate against any group, for example, gays or any other group? What does that say about us?
Hey, most of America is talking about the issue as to whether or not gays should get married or not exterminating them. the population is liberal enough on the topic that they actually are considering something that never would have been considered historically.
Yeah, a lot of people are, and I happen to believe that gays should be able to be married. I see no reason why the misery of marriage should be limited to heterosexuals. Misery loves company.
Well, do you think the nation is with you on that?
They're getting there.
Okay, so Rick
Not for that reason, but
Rick Santorum then is out of step with America.
but he's not, at this point in time, competing with America. At this point in time, he's competing for the votes of conservatives, Republicans.
The thing is, whatever is said is remembered forever today because it's captured
Okay.
on movies, television screens.
You really missed my question, though. I'm coming back here. What does it say about us as a country if we have such a significant part of our population who is willing to vote for somebody because he stands for the principle of hating such a large, measurable group of our people?
I don't think in the long run you are going to see Americans supporting that.
I'm talking about the ones that do.
They
He
don't
won,
have to
he
talk.
basically got elected, or won the primaries in Colorado and Missouri, and what was that other state that he won? 3 of them, I can't remember the third one. And he won, Maine, I believe it was. And he won them by appealing to people who hated gays and hated women and hated giving women control over reproductive rights. So he won by huge majorities of people who shared that philosophy. What does this say about us, that we have so many people who control the Republican Party in those states who were so socially intolerant?
Well, I'd remind you that you pointed out this is a Republican primary. And the extreme issues, the groups that vote for those get out there and vote for him, but I don't think it's representative of the American population. I don't think that the Republican Party stands a chance of winning the presidency with Santorum. I think it's important to keep them, to keep it in balance in terms of who's voting and why. Is not necessarily indicative of the general population.
Well, then let's use your...
You'll even vote for Obama over him. You said so.
When I meant it.
Okay.
But let's go back then. Let's go back and put your history cap on. And is there any point in time in history where there have been so many people in a political party who are determined to commit political suicide, who are so rabid, so insane, so irrational on their belief structure that they are ready to nominate somebody who can't possibly win just to make a point?
Oh, there have been times throughout American history where politicians ran that didn't have a chance of winning. Take a look at the Catholic candidate in the 20s, Smith.
Okay, tell me about Al Smith. Let's talk about him.
Well,
He was the governor of New York, right? What did they call him? The Happy Warrior? And he ran against Herbert Hoover, if I'm not mistaken.
and he didn't have a chance of winning. Why?
I'm asking because he was Catholic?
He was an untenable candidate, like Santorum. He might get the party's nomination. He's definitely not going to be electable.
I don't know that much about that election. I thought that people went, Hoover succeeded Calvin Coolidge, didn't he? And wasn't Cal a Republican too?
Yes.
And Hoover came in and we had a really booming economy.
Well, we had 3 recessions, didn't we, in the 20s, followed by the Great Depression?
That was in the 30s, but I thought that over
1929.
Calvin Coolidge was the philosophy of government is government, let everything go, and I thought we were in the roaring 20s and the roaring 20s, the boom time in the 20s.
Don't necessarily roaring for a lot. Take a look at the farming communities.
But
We had a depression there before it hit the rest of the country.
But didn't that start with Hoover?
No, you also had a situation where the economy wasn't balanced, where you had the two, I believe, the two areas that were carrying the rest of the economy was the auto industry and the housing industry. But it was an imbalanced economy. And we had 3 recessions during that time period before it crashed completely in 29. This is why Hoover was not electable in 32.
Yeah. Well, he had the policy of prosperities are just around the corner. He didn't want to do any programs.
He finally did, but too little too late.
Yeah. But so was it the largely economic issues that kept Smith out of the White House, or was it really that much on his religion? Why did they nominate him? He was the governor of New York.
You know, they thought he had traction, like many people think Santorum does, but he doesn't. Not when you look at the general American voting population. It was too novel an idea to have a Catholic as president.
You mean?
They thought that the Pope would be running back and forwards under tunnel from Europe to America to run the government. It's the same sort of thing Kennedy had to listen to, and he won by what, 0.02%?
Well, yeah, one of the things that's
Popular
really
vote.
interesting about that race was that one of the big issues in the Kennedy and Nixon election was federal aid to education. Kennedy was for it, Nixon was against it. Nixon was against it because he said once you start getting federal aid to education, you're going to have federal control of education.
No Child Left Behind?
Every child left behind, yeah.
Yeah.
So are there any other examples you can think of where a party was suicidal and who they nominated?
Well, as you know, you're the strong one in American history. I throw it back to you.
Well, that's why I asked you. I don't remember anything where anybody was really that suicidal. Trying to remember the election of 1860, you had Abraham Lincoln, but
The Know-Nothing Party?
and he was running against the little midget. What was his name? Stephen Douglas. Yeah. But he was Lincoln was hardly a shoo-in. It was a very hard-fought, contested race. I don't remember anyone who was ever put up as that much of where a party was just that unrealistic in terms of.
What about Goldwater?
Well, I think God could have been running in 1964 and he'd have got beat.
The nation feeling guilty about what happened to Kennedy?
Yeah, we were still in shock. There wasn't any, and that's why Goldwater, who was really a very good politician, really ran such a campaign where he said what he thought. He might as well, because he knew that there wasn't any way that he was going to get elected in the face of that assassination. We were too much of a broken country. But I would say more McGovern.
Ah, okay.
But McGovern.
And his vice president was a problem to him as well.
Well, no, but they nominated McGovern because it wasn't sacrificial in the same way that Santorum was. McGovern was running to get out of the Vietnam War that was very, very unpopular. And Nixon had actually been a pretty damn good president.
Foreign policy, definitely.
Well, Nixon was all set to tackle Medicare and Social Security when Watergate came up. So Nixon was actually, he opened China, aside from his personal shortcomings, which are...
Ping pong diplomacy.
Yeah, he was really... had a lot of accomplishments to be proud of as president. Unfortunately, he was a crook.
But he did a lot to rehabilitate his image before he died.
Anyhow. Well, that's all for today. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for joining us, folks. Please tune in next time. Good night.
Good night.